Have you ever looked in the mirror and realized that the person staring back at you is a stranger shaped by everyone else's expectations, but not your own? There comes a moment, quiet and terrifying, when the soul whispers, "Choose me." And everything in your life, the noise, the roles, the masks, begins to fall away. That's when the real journey begins, the journey back to yourself. Choosing yourself marks the beginning of a journey that is not outward, but inward. It is the quiet revolution of turning away from the noise of external demands and toward the subtle voice within that has been drowned out for years. This act initiates the process of self-realization, where you begin to uncover who you truly are beneath the expectations, the conditioning, and the stories you've been told about yourself. It's not simply a decision, it's an awakening. This is the moment when the soul stirs and demands your attention, no longer content with being silenced in the name of harmony or acceptance. Choosing yourself is the moment the self demands to be seen, heard, and embraced, without condition. This journey, though deeply personal, is not self-centered in the shallow sense. It is not about narcissism or rejecting others. Rather, it is about aligning with the deeper truth of who you are, even when that truth disrupts, even when it disturbs the roles you've played for others. In choosing yourself, you embark on a process often referred to as individuation, the natural unfolding of the self into its fullest, truest expression. This is not about becoming something new. It is about uncovering what has always been hidden beneath the masks, the personas, and the inherited identities. To choose yourself is to listen to your own inner rhythm rather than dancing to the music of someone else's expectations. It is the moment you stop trying to be liked and start trying to be real. You begin to confront the parts of yourself you've ignored, your desires, your doubts, your strengths, and your wounds. You stop outsourcing your sense of worth and begin to develop an internal compass that guides your life. It's a movement away from dependence and towards sovereignty, where your actions stem from a place of deep alignment, not fear of rejection or hope for approval. This process isn't easy. It often comes with pain, as you begin to realize how much of your life has been spent playing a role, chasing validation and avoiding conflict just to belong. There is grief in this awakening, grief for the time lost, for the versions of you that had to be suppressed, and for the relationships that may not survive the shift. But this grief is sacred. It purifies, it clears the space for something more honest to emerge, a life that reflects your truth rather than your compromises. As you move deeper into this journey, you begin to understand that choosing yourself is not a single act, but a continuous process. Every day presents a choice, to betray yourself or to honor yourself, to speak your truth or to remain silent, to follow your intuition or to conform. With each choice to return to yourself, you gain strength. You gather fragments of your soul and begin to stitch them back together. You become whole, not because you are perfect, but because you are finally real. Choosing yourself is not the end. It is the beginning, the quiet but powerful beginning of a life lived in alignment with your soul. The moment you choose yourself is the moment the mask begins to slip. The mask, that finely crafted persona you've worn to be accepted, praised, and loved, starts to feel heavy, tight, and no longer yours. For years, maybe decades, you've tailored your image to fit expectations: the good child, the ideal partner, the loyal friend, the competent worker. You've become fluent in the language of pleasing others, sometimes so fluent that you forget there was once another language, the voice of your authentic self. But the moment you place your own truth above all else, the illusion starts to fracture. You begin to realize that the person others love, admire, or even envy isn't really you. It's a projection, a carefully managed version of you that hides discomfort, avoids confrontation, and conforms to remain safe. This false persona is not inherently malicious or deceptive. It was formed out of necessity. It helped you navigate a world that often rewards conformity more than authenticity. It protected you from rejection, judgment, and emotional vulnerability. In many ways, it served a purpose. But over time, it becomes a prison, a shell that restricts your growth, your joy, and your full human experience. When you choose yourself, you begin to dismantle that shell. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins with small moments, saying no when you're used to saying yes, admitting you don't have it all together, showing up in your messiness rather than hiding behind perfection. Each act of truth chips away at the mask. Each step into authenticity is a step out of captivity. This unraveling can be terrifying. The mask has brought you love, recognition, and a sense of place in the world. What happens if people don't like what they see beneath it? What if they leave? These are the questions that emerge in the silence between your old self and your real self. The fear is valid because the answer is that some might walk away. Some relationships are built on the version of you that never challenged, never disrupted, never asked for more. When you start showing up as your real self, those bonds may break. But what you lose in superficial acceptance, you gain in freedom. No longer bound by the need to maintain a performance, you are free to explore, to change, to contradict yourself, to evolve. This freedom is not the absence of responsibility. It is the beginning of a new responsibility. To be honest, first with yourself and then with the world. You begin to speak from your center rather than your scripts. You no longer bend yourself into shapes to fit the expectations of others. You learn to live with discomfort, not avoid it. You allow people to misunderstand you, to dislike you, even to abandon you, because the price of being loved for who you're not is too high. And then something else happens. The more you live from your authentic self, the more you attract people, experiences, and opportunities that resonate with your truth. The relationships that remain become deeper, more meaningful, rooted not in performance but in presence. You begin to experience a different kind of peace, not the peace that comes from avoidance, but the peace that comes from alignment. You are no longer split between who you are and who you pretend to be. You are no longer a stranger to your own soul. When you finally choose yourself above all, you are inevitably led to confront the parts of you that you've long kept hidden. The parts you were told were unacceptable, shameful, or dangerous. These are not merely flaws or bad habits. They are aspects of your psyche that have been exiled into the unconscious. They form what is often referred to as the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is simply everything you have rejected in yourself in order to survive, be loved, or feel safe. It includes your anger, your desires, your envy, your fears, your doubts, and even your deep creative potential that was never given permission to exist. Choosing yourself means that you are ready to face this hidden realm, not with judgment, but with curiosity and courage. This is not a comfortable process. In fact, it is often the most difficult part of becoming whole. For years, perhaps all your life, you've been trying to be good, trying to be liked, trying to be acceptable by suppressing anything that threatens your image. But that suppression doesn't erase what's inside. It only pushes it into the dark, where it grows in power and begins to sabotage your life from the shadows. You may find yourself lashing out unexpectedly, feeling blocked creatively, making choices that contradict your values, or feeling inexplicably anxious or depressed. These are signals, not of failure, but of inner conflict. The self you show the world and the self you've hidden from it are at war. To choose yourself in this deeper way is to begin making peace with that war. It is to sit with your own darkness and ask, why are you here? What do you want me to know? It is to stop pretending you are only light, only good, only controlled. You start to realize that everything you feared inside yourself was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to be integrated. Your rage may be the voice of boundaries you never set. Your jealousy may be pointing to a dream you've abandoned. Your sadness may be showing you the life you've been too afraid to claim. These feelings are not enemies. They are messengers. When you choose yourself, you stop shooting the messenger. You begin listening. This kind of inner listening requires radical honesty. You must be willing to see the parts of yourself you've tried to deny. It can be painful. You may cry for the version of yourself that was never allowed to be. You may feel guilt, even horror, at the things you've hidden, but this pain is part of the healing. It is the necessary breaking open of the false self to make space for the real one. As you integrate the shadow, not by indulging it, but by understanding and accepting it, you begin to reclaim your energy. The energy you once used to suppress yourself becomes available for creation, connection, and authenticity. And something profound begins to happen. The more you embrace your shadow, the less power it has over you. You no longer need to wear a mask to hide it, because it is no longer a threat. You have looked into the dark and found yourself still worthy of love. You stop fearing your complexity, and you begin to live with a sense of depth and wholeness that cannot be faked. You become less reactive, more compassionate, both with yourself and with others. For once you've seen your own darkness and embraced it, you are far more capable of holding space for the shadows of those around you. When you finally choose yourself above all, you begin to relinquish your addiction to being seen, validated, or affirmed by others. The chase for approval no longer feels fulfilling. In fact, it begins to feel hollow, even painful. You notice how much of your life was shaped around earning applause, fitting into molds, and curating your actions for praise, whether it was through grades, likes, promotions, or polite smiles of approval. You were conditioned to associate your worth with how others responded to you. But choosing yourself shifts this entirely. It calls you to stop seeking mirrors outside and instead look within, even when the world is silent, even when no one is clapping. This withdrawal from external validation is not an easy break. It's a deep rewiring of the psyche. At first, there's confusion, a kind of internal vertigo. If no one is there to affirm that you're doing well, how do you know if you are? If people disapprove, does it mean you've made a mistake? These questions arise because the old system, the one that equated success with approval, is crumbling. There's a deep vulnerability that comes with relying solely on your inner compass. You must begin to trust yourself without evidence. You must begin to believe your truth, even if it's unpopular or misunderstood. That takes courage. Most people don't realize they need until they start the journey inward. You begin to realize how often you deluded yourself to be palatable to others. You start to see the small betrayals, times you smiled when you wanted to cry, said yes when you meant no, played small so others wouldn't feel threatened. You understand now that you were never really loved, not in the way you needed, because people were loving a version of you that didn't actually exist. This insight can be devastating, but it's also liberating. You finally see that in the pursuit of external love, you abandoned the most important relationship you will ever have, the one with your own soul. In the space that opens when you stop performing for others, something extraordinary begins to grow, a quiet but powerful sense of self-respect. It isn't boastful or loud, it's steady. It comes from knowing you are living in alignment with what feels true to you, not what pleases others. You begin to move through life with more clarity. You know what feels right and what doesn't, not because someone told you, but because you can feel it in your bone. You begin to speak with honesty, not just when it's convenient, but when it's necessary. You begin to live with integrity, even if it costs you comfort or popularity. You may find yourself alone more often. Some people will drift away when you stop playing the role they expect, but the solitude that once felt unbearable now feels sacred. You are no longer lonely. You are simply with yourself. You stop measuring your worth by how full your calendar is or how many people text you back. You stop needing to be the favorite, the admired, the chosen one. You are already chosen by yourself. That is enough. That is everything. From this place, your choices begin to reflect not what will be applauded, but what will be remembered by your soul. When you finally choose yourself above all, a subtle shift begins to unfold in the fabric of your life. Things that once felt chaotic, disconnected, or arbitrary begin to take on a strange sense of order. You start to notice patterns, coincidences, and deeply meaningful connections that defy logic. These moments often feel like chance, but carry a weight that speaks directly to your core. A book arrives in your life at just the right time. A person shows up when you need a sign. An opportunity presents itself when you've finally let go of what was no longer serving you. This is not coincidence in the traditional sense. It is synchronicity, a kind of meaningful alignment between your inner world and the outer one. These synchronicities do not appear when you're chasing validation or living in a false persona. They emerge when you are finally honest with yourself, when your internal and external lives begin to mirror one another. By choosing yourself, you create a frequency that is uniquely yours, and the world starts to respond to it. It's as if life recognizes that you're no longer pretending, no longer lost in someone else's story, and it begins to meet you at that place of truth. The more in tune you are with your inner self, the more clearly you begin to see how the universe speaks, not through grand gestures, but through the subtleties of timing, resonance, and deep inner knowing. Synchronicity becomes your silent guide. It confirms that you're on the path, even when the road feels uncertain. It can come in the form of a phrase someone says in passing that answers a question you haven't asked out loud. It can be a song lyric that hits your heart at the exact moment you're grappling with a choice. It can be a sudden inspiration that seems to come from nowhere, but somehow feels like it's always been with you. When you are disconnected from yourself, you often miss these moments. But when you choose yourself, your awareness sharpens. You begin to feel more alive, more alert, more attuned to the world within and without. This connection to synchronicity is not something you can force. It's not a tool for control. It's a relationship, a dance between your soul and the larger whole. It asks for trust, patience, and receptivity. You must be willing to let go of rigid plans and open yourself to what might emerge. You must allow the unknown to guide you, not with fear, but with curiosity. The beauty of synchronicity is that it doesn't provide answers. It provides signs, and those signs lead you not toward some perfect outcome, but toward deeper authenticity. In many ways, synchronicity is the language of the soul. It is how life speaks when words fail. When you finally choose yourself, you learn to listen, not just with your ears, but with your entire being. You stop dismissing the small things, the quiet whispers, the strange timings. You begin to realize that life is not random. It is responsive. It is intimate. And when you align with your truth, life aligns with you. It starts walking beside you, echoing your steps, mirroring your growth. You are no longer pushing against the current, you are moving with it. And in that flow, life begins to feel less like a struggle and more like a conversation. When you finally choose yourself above all, you start to understand that healing is not about becoming someone new. It's about returning to who you were before the world told you who you should be. This realization unravels slowly, like a memory buried deep beneath layers of conditioning. roles, and survival strategies. Choosing yourself is not a one-time decision, but a devotion, a daily willingness to sit with what is real, raw, and unresolved within you. It is not linear. It does not promise instant peace. It often begins with discomfort, because for the first time in perhaps a long time, you're not numbing, avoiding, or distracting. You are simply present. And in that presence, the real work begins. This work does not look heroic from the outside. There are no medals given for facing your grief, your shame, or your deeply buried fears. There are no standing ovations when you admit to yourself that you are exhausted, heartbroken, or lost. But that is what true healing demands: honesty without performance, courage without applause. When you choose yourself, you create space for this honesty to rise. You begin to see where you've abandoned yourself in the name of being loved. You feel where you've silenced your voice just to avoid conflict. You acknowledge the moments you settled, stayed small, or stayed silent because it felt safer than facing rejection. And instead of judging yourself for these moments, you begin to hold them with compassion, because now you see those choices were never made from weakness, but from pain. Healing is not about fixing yourself, because you are not broken. It's about recognizing the many selves you've fragmented into just to survive. It's about gathering those lost pieces, the parts of you that felt too much, too wild, too sensitive, too different, and welcoming them home. The child in you who learned to stay quiet to keep the peace. The adolescent who built walls because being vulnerable once led to pain. The adult who still sometimes pretends to have it all together when they're falling apart inside. Choosing yourself means calling back those parts, not to judge them, but to integrate them, to let them know they are safe now, they belong. As you walk this path of healing, you begin to notice subtle shifts. Your inner dialogue softens. You stop pushing yourself so hard. You start asking questions like, what do I really need right now? Instead of, what should I be doing? You rest more. You grieve more. You say no more often. And surprisingly, life doesn't fall apart. It begins to come together. Not in a neat, polished way, but in a way that feels real. You start to attract connections that reflect your truth rather than your performance. You begin to build a life, not from fear or compensation, but from alignment. This inner healing becomes the foundation of everything else. Your relationships, your work, your creativity, your joy, they all begin to bloom from this fertile soil of self-respect. You no longer need to hustle for worthiness or prove your value. You simply are, and that is enough. You become a safe space for yourself. You become your own anchor. And in doing so, you become someone others can trust, not because you never fall, but because you know how to rise, not because you have all the answers, but because you're no longer afraid of the questions. Choosing yourself is the ultimate act of healing. It is the sacred return to your own soul. When you choose yourself above all, you do not become selfish, you become whole. You no longer abandon your truth for comfort, trade your authenticity for approval, or betray your soul to belong. Instead, you stand grounded in who you are, no longer seeking permission, but embodying permission itself. You become the calm in your own storm, the voice you trust when the world is loud, and the love that no longer needs to be found because it has always lived within you. The path is not easy, but it is sacred, because in choosing yourself, you don't just heal, you come home.